Hello, everyone. My name is Bobby Mann. I'm the Chief Programs Officer for Humane Rescue Alliance based out in Washington, D.C. Before we get it kicked off, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement in the spirit of healing for the Nezanan people, where I am currently located in Granite Bay, California. So thank you for that opportunity. I am so excited for today. Someone who I have been a longtime fan of and had the opportunity to work with for the past several months. It's someone who has been deep rooted in not only the animal welfare part of this work, but the human welfare part of this work for not 3 days, not 3 months, not 3 years, but 3 decades, folks. You know, I can talk on and on about Shaq, but I think the best thing that we can do is actually share a video that was made by the Humane Rescue Alliance team that really articulates how amazing Shaq is in the community. So Allison, I'm going to go over to you to please kick off the video for us.
My name is Shakela Brown. Everyone calls me Shaq, and I work with the HOPE program. The HOPE program is to help out, partner, and engage, and it is one of the community programs here at the Humane Rescue Alliance. And we help people in our focus zip code, which is 220, but then we also have services for the entire city, which is free and low-cost spay neuters, and we also have our pet pantry. So I've worked for HRA for 25 years as of October 2019. I started off as animal caretaker, front desk, overnight, ACO, HLE officer, and then I also did human education for 10 years, and then this is the past 5 years doing community outreach with the HOPE program. So each day is different. So when I transport animals from Southeast to come here for surgical services, that means I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be here at 5 to go back to Southeast to pick up the animals to bring here for service. And then throughout the day, we have clients calling about different services, whether they need the pet pantry, whether they're interested in spay neuter, whether they have general questions about their animals. So each day is very different. So I wanted to do community outreach because I look back on my days as a humane officer where we basically went in and took animals and kind of prosecuted people for things they've done, where the community outreach program is more of a prevention program. You get to meet people in different places of life. You get to have conversations with them. You get to share information with them where they then can pass the information on to the rest of the community. I believe that the community outreach is super important. People really do look to us for information, for services. So just being a part of the community shows that we really care about them and not only their animals.
Amazing. Thank you again to the Humane Rescue Alliance marketing and communications team for that amazing video. And without further ado, I'd love for you all to light up this chat and give a strong, warm welcome for a mentor and a big sister of mine, Shakela Brown. Hello. How are you? It's such an honor to be hanging out with you. And I know a big part of this conversation today is really about telling your story and your history in this work, and sprinkling in some tactics about a lot of the community program work, race equity work, and just leadership that you provided at Humane Rescue Alliance. But before we get into the bigger picture of the tactics, I really want to start with your story, Shaq. So can you please take us all the way to the beginning of your childhood, where you grew up, and where your passion for animals came from?
So I grew up in PG County, Maryland. My grandfather always had dogs. So that was just the thing that we always had in our household. So I used to play with the dogs, talk to dogs. Many people know that also I stutter. So as a child, I used to stutter more, and I used to read to the dogs, and that kind of helped me along with reading and speaking in public and even talking with people.
So very early on, and you talked a lot about your grandfather and just the vision that he gave you for wanting to be an advocate for animals. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that experience in your life?
Sure. So my grandfather, like I said, he was in the Marines, and then he was in the Navy, and he used to, take great care of dogs. He would comb them, walk them, take pictures of them. And so that encouraged me to want to, just do more for animals. We also had like long conversations about like doing what's right in communities and really paying attention to people and animals. And so my grandfather kind of instilled that love of animals, which translated into people.
Amazing. And so growing up in Prince George's County, for those that don't know, is a neighboring community to the District of Columbia, which is an area that still needs much service and resources. but Shaq has been very rooted within a small geographical region and has been working her magic ever since. So Shaq, can you talk a little bit about, one, you went from being a child that was invested in animal welfare into someone that actually got into the work. So what was it like when you actually jumped into the field?
So I started off as a caretaker at the animal shelter on New York Avenue, probably like 1998. And again, for my love for animals, I always wanted to be around them. And so I just wanted to be a caretaker at that point. And then Tanya Roberts, who used to work the front desk, always pushed me to like, come train to do the front desk, come train to do other things. And I never really wanted to do that because, again, I stuttered. And so that was a harder thing to do. But she definitely was an ally. She definitely pushed me and encouraged me to do more.
I love that. I absolutely want you to talk about Tanya. And I also want to just mention Mary's comment about what your mother had told you about respecting people where they are. I think that is something that you have taught me much in my career. And with Tanya, right, respecting you where you were, how did it feel in your career, early in your career, to have a non-BIPOC ally, right? A white woman who saw you and saw your potential. What did that mean for you very early on in your career?
Well, it actually just showed me that I could do more than I thought. Again, like coming from our family always respected people. Like my mother was, she worked in the Department of Corrections. And so she would see inmates on the street and they would be like, hey, Lou, and they weren't mad at her and things like that. And she respected people where they were. And so that kind of taught me that I needed to continue to grow in the field. And so when Tanya kept pushing me, I mean, again, at first I was mad, like, no, I just want to do one job here. And then obviously I've been here for a long time. So I've obviously just continued to learn and push myself. So, but I really appreciated Tanya for her pushing me and, being funny and a comedian in all the ways that she was.
I love that. Well, a big thanks from me as well to Tanya, because I have learned a lot through that relationship that you've had with her. And so speaking of sort of your journey in animal welfare, you went from customer service to humane law enforcement. You mentioned that in your video, and that really gave you an opportunity to get out into the community. Did you want to talk about that transition with us? Yeah,
so I was asked to apply for that position. I wasn't necessarily interested at first because I was like, oh, people are calling about, dogs being mistreated. I didn't think that I would be able to handle, just to be able to see that type of cruelty or neglect to animals. But when I started, I saw more like kind of like neglect, not necessarily cruelty, but it was more like neglect. It might have been only 30% of the cases because back then we didn't have too many. We had some dog fighting, but not organized dog fighting. So there were some, issues of that. But most of the cases were based upon like lack of food and lack of medical treatment for pets. And so I learned then that part was the just not able to provide basic services because there was none. And even today, there's still very limited services in that same area because when I did Humane Law Enforcement in Southeast, I'm doing that same outreach area stuff now. So
I appreciate that so much. And that's something that I have gotten from you as well, Shaq, is when you talk about partnering with our community and having assumptions, right? We talk about what are some of the tactics for people wanting to get into this work, is never walk in with assumptions because you never really know if this is a situation where someone doesn't care or it's a lack of access, which you learned very quickly that probably only 30% of the services that you were activated for were because of real cruelty. And much of it was just people wanting help for the animals they love. Does that sound right?
Yep, and it was definitely a lack of access to information. So not only resources, but some basic information. And I always said that we were the prevention piece as far as the humane law enforcement. And now I get to do like the prevention part, which was very needed.
I love that. When you told me we were the intervention, but there was yet no prevention, that is really what lit the fire in you to really want to do this community work. And so you touched on the word education and partnering with your community. And so you did make the leap. You went from humane law enforcement to humane education and outreach. Can you talk about what that looked like for you?
So I had a lot of kid cases and Debbie Dewell was like, oh, Shaq, you should come and do schools. And I was like, I don't really like kids like that. And they're bad. And she was like, no, because kids really need to see people that look like them. And so she really encouraged me. She kind of talked to me for about 2 to 3 years before I chose to do that position. So Debbie Dewell kind of pushed me into going to schools, talking with kids and just doing different lessons to show them that there are other people who care about animals that are BIPOC.
I love it. So Debbie, another ally of yours, who is still with Humane Rescue Alliance doing humane education work, was very invested in you and getting you out there. And I've seen some amazing pictures of you in the community. And Shaq, you even shared with me that you were doing the work so long ago that you now have parents that have kids that are doing humane education work with that. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, it's
That
just
isn't.
funny to see people on the street says, "Oh, I remember you because you came to my elementary school." Like, I'm like, that was a long time ago. So it's just funny just to see students and people, constantly like recognize me and say, "Oh, yeah, you still there?" So they, the whole thing about trust and building relationships in the community is something huge, and people will always remember, the fact that you tried to help them out.
Yeah, and I ain't trying to age my big sister. All I'm trying to tell people is it takes time and deep rooted investment in order to actually make impact in the community. And that's something that we definitely want to instill into this conversation. And so, Shaq, you went from humane law enforcement to going out into the community with humane education. And then your next goal was to really to bring the youth back in. So can you talk a little bit about the DC summer youth programs and what you started doing to introduce kids to animal welfare work?
So the Humane Education Program, well, that was the name of it. So I named it, or I renamed it to the Humane Educational Outreach Program so that I could do things other than school. So I started doing Boys and Girls Clubs, churches. Then I started to hire DC Summer Youth. And I want to say when I first started, maybe 2006 or so, I hired maybe 10 students, which was a lot to have at the Georgia Avenue location. But I wanted to have like this rainbow coalition of different types of kids who live different places, who all look different, so that kids could work together, just so they can see that, this teen is very similar to myself. And so I hired all these teenagers, and because each year there were 300 kids who would actually apply to work at the Humane Rescue Alliance, or back then WHS, but we did not have enough space, so I could only, hire a certain amount. And so we had different groups of kids coming in to work, and then also just to be there to volunteer.
I appreciate that so much. And I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that, Shaq, right, is I think oftentimes in animal welfare, we're very quantitative, right? We want to make the largest impact. We want to help the most animals. We want to support the most people. But as we are getting into this diversity, equity, inclusion work, the quality of those relationships and the quality of those experiences are just as important. So as very well Shaq could have brought 300 kids to that organization, we made sure, or she made sure, that it was amount of kids that we can support to make sustainable, long-lasting impact for those youth. Because as you know, if a person has a good experience, they maybe will tell a couple people. If they have a really bad experience, the whole community is going to find out about it. So make sure that you crawl before you walk and you walk before you can run. So Shaq, something else that you had brought up to me as you were working with the community and bringing the community in is the concept of what's right, what's wrong, and what's fair. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So when I was doing schools, there were always, so the high schools like McKinley Tech, and the kids were coming and be like, "Oh, Miss Brown, did you see what happened on the news?" And so when the Trayvon Martin case came up, those students were like, "So Miss Brown, we'll talk about this animal issue about Trayvon Martin." And I don't think we have to choose between a dog and a people's life, because wrong is wrong. But usually when that topic comes up, and even in the community, even to this day, people will talk about animal issues and people issues, and they'll compare them to say that this person shouldn't have went to jail or this person should be in jail, compared to saying like both of these issues are wrong. But the high school students really did challenge me, because they wanted to talk about that for more than an hour. And I always wanted them to kind of, see justice for themselves. And I wanted them to do things, because even back then, that school specifically, they had fought with some other kids, and they had it on the news. They had it on all types of Facebook things. But the students didn't really want to talk about it. They didn't want to, just write this letter and say, "Hey, we're not like all these other kids who are actually fighting." So they wanted to talk about that, but then I also wanted them to push them to actually be proactive in speaking up for themselves. Because with the school programs, human education, like, you can't just tell a kid to speak up for an animal, but they're not willing to speak up for themselves. Like, that's really important for them to value their life as well, and not just like for animals.
Thank you, Shaq. And we are going to get more into the diversity, equity, inclusion work and having the right types of conversations. But one of the things that you got into as soon as you were doing this is really partnering with organizations. And so I would love for you to talk about Young Life, which was a Christian-based community organization, and how working with a non-animal welfare organization gave you ideas on how to help people and pets.
So Young Life, I always wanted to do outreach within my church, and I found Young Life through Missy Lane, and she would walk around the neighborhood, meeting students and really spending time with them. Most mentorship programs are like once a week, you talk, you're sending an email, you're sending text, but this was really hands-on. This was really meeting kids where they are, their behavior, like, going to their schools and seeing them. And part of their philosophy was you have to earn the right to be heard. And with that means you have to build a relationship. So it's not like you can come in and just start asking people questions. You have to really build a relationship, watch and see, and actually spend time with the students.
You have to earn the right to be heard. And Shaq, that is something that you have absolutely done. And I think folks in animal welfare are just trickling their feet into. Is, we often feel like we have the solutions to people's problems, but the reality is often we don't even know what the true problem is. So earning the right to be heard is such a good slogan. And Shaq, you talked about things that Missy Lane did outside of transactional things, right? You talked about just being a part of the community, or how often she would go to the community, or just be a part of certain situations that kids were in. Can you touch on that really briefly?
Yeah, so so it's more of a thing where you actually have to be there. And when I talk about like community programs and things like that, it's because you actually have to see what the community is like. You have to be a part, you have to shop there, get your nails done, eat there, because the community gets to see you just hanging around. Like, who is this lady? I always see her every Thursday at the same spot. And so that taught me to be consistent with the students, which then taught me to be consistent doing community outreach, because I would see clients at the 7-Eleven on the whole road before they closed it, unfortunately, or at the library. So it's about being consistent and always showing up, because then people get to see, oh, this lady's here again, this lady's here again.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And so, Shaq, you go from working with Young Life into a program that folks on this call may be more familiar with, which is Pets for Life. So could you talk a little bit about what your work looked like when you started implementing Pets for Life programs, and what that meant for your career?
So I love Pets for Life. They are really, they definitely taught me even more than what Young Life taught me, because they were definitely like relational. They definitely gave lists of books to read for people who were non-BIPOC, because most people like myself, like, we know the conditions that we see every day. We know what goes on in our own community, but people who don't live in community, they don't necessarily know. And so they give you books, and you don't have to be a BIPOC person to go into a BIPOC community to help them. And so Pets for Life showed me the steps of going into communities, building relationships, and again, really being consistent. Like literally, I walked Southeast, went door to door by myself with my bag of treats, toys, dewormer, leashes and collars, and just offering people like, hey, does your pet need anything? And that was the beginning of that, was just going door to door, block to block, walking around, talking to people, hanging out again at the 7-Eleven, getting coffee, or going to the library just so I can be seen in Southeast.
And Shaq, so when I had asked you the question about where animal welfare organizations should start, what you posed to me is, one, it starts with learning, and two, partnering with other organizations like Young Life or human food bank programs. Is that the advice you would give folks?
Yes, well, I definitely will, because the fact that when you start partnering with non-animal organizations, first of all, sometimes people don't notice, or they don't think that people care for their pets like it is part of their family. And I think that is like one of the first things, because there are a lot of groups that say, oh, we're a holistic someone's pet. So I think that is have to start with, but just food banks and just going to food banks and community outreach, that literally shows that you are a part of the community, you're willing to help out people and not just pets.
I think she may have dropped off, but I'm not surprised, because she was dropping so much knowledge on us that she probably literally broke the internet. So Miss Valerie Brown, Miss Brown, Shaq's mom is on this call. Oh my gosh, she made the invite. Miss Brown, while your daughter is getting back on this call, I would be so honored if you would unmute and say hello to us. It would just be an honor.
Hi, guys.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm feeling really proud of my daughter right now.
So, I mean, I feel like this is the ultimate fact check is when you can ask mama if what Shaq is saying is actually true. So how are you feeling about this story and how is it relating to your life?
Well, she's absolutely true. She's telling the truth. She grew up with dogs because she grew up around her grandfather mostly, and we've always had dogs, mostly German shepherds. And he taught her how to groom them and walk them, and her being an only child for so long, she has a towards dogs. She has a patience for people. So yeah.
I love it. Well, on behalf of everybody on this call, your daughter, who is back on this call, is an absolute legend. And I think this may be a first in Candid conversation where we've had a mama step in and play the role as the presentation folks who are getting back on the call. So thank you so much, Valerie. I will ask you to go back off camera and we will make this again all about your amazing daughter. So Shaq, thank you so much for coming back. I want to hop right into another conversation that you taught me about food bank programs, right? This is something that you and I have talked about. Humane Rescue Alliance is on track this year, providing over $500,000 of food between our DC and New Jersey campuses to the community. And we've had different visions for this, right? I think this is where I have personally done a lot of learning. I've actually learned to speak Shaq fluently in my life because Shaq will look at me and I'll have to do a lot of active listening through tones. And if I get a or a I know I'm not saying the right thing. And when I get a okay, that's when I'm going the right way. But Shaq, talk to me about consistency, right? I'm always like, if we have food, we have it. If we don't, we don't. But you're very much an advocate of making sure we show up with consistency. Can you talk to folks about how important that is?
Yes. So the pet pantries, definitely a need, and us being consistent is really important because not only do they ask for food, they also ask about medical care. They also ask about, oh, my pet may need shots or going on. Even before COVID, that stopped any pet pantries, which is really important because there has been food shortages in the stores. Like I feed stray cats, for people who know, and last year, I literally started documenting the lack of cat food. And I took pictures of Target. These are major stores like Target and Shoppers and Family Dollar. And I can drive around to all of these places to get food, right? But people who live in these communities cannot. So they depend on us to get supplemental food because, again, in these areas, there are only 1 to 2 grocery stores in these areas. So our presence in the community is definitely needed, and it definitely has to be consistent.
Yeah, some data that I will add to that, folks, and this is sort of on the human services side. I was taught that individuals living in Ward 7 and 8, where Shaq is providing the most level of access to care, for people to go have their clothes washed are often taking 2 buses and traveling for over an hour and 20 minutes just to wash their clothes. And so if we as animal welfare folks can at least reduce the burden of people having to go another place to get pet food, that is what true collaboration and partnership is about. So Shaq, thank you for always holding me accountable and learning from you. And I'm very proud to say that we are very consistent with the food that we're providing. But Shaq, I want to get into present times, right? We talked about your life. You had your mom pop in and talk about how amazing you are. We talked about some programs, but COVID, right? We reimagined the future of sheltering. Everybody's talking about community-centric models and community programs. How does it feel to know that in the last 2 or 3 years, animal welfare is talking about what you've been doing for the last 3 decades?
I'm very excited. Of course, I've always wanted them to talk about different issues and again, focus on the person, the people, and not necessarily the animals. So it's very exciting. I'm definitely looking forward to the future.
And one of the things that you mentioned to me, right, was this isn't in fact the first time in your career where there has been a buzz around community programs. Was there a time before that you wanted to mention?
So I want to say, even all the way back when there was Hurricane Katrina, people saw that people were not leaving their pets behind. And that was like really huge. That was like a big thing when they was getting rescued on top of their roof with their dog or their cats and their animals. And people said, oh, now we kind of see that people do love their animals as much as they love, themselves. But we also know that we have seniors who say if they don't have food, or people who don't have food, their pets will usually eat before them, because people really do care for their, pets. They just need some resources.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway that I got from that is, this is trending, and Shaq taught me that it in fact has trended before. And if we truly do believe in community-based programs, we have to make sure that we continue to invest into these things and not just make it another current trend. So Shaq, earlier you had mentioned that we have to earn the right to be listened to. And you also mentioned that many of the students that you were speaking with brought up Trayvon Martin. And I think during COVID, the murder of George Floyd really activated the concept of diversity, equity, inclusion, and race equity inclusion. So you have been someone who has been a mentor and ally for me in this space. I'm very proud to say under your leadership and others at HRA, we have doubled the amount of people in leadership roles that are BIPOC from 15 to over 31. But what does it make you feel like that REI work is so important right now in this space?
Well, I think it gives people a voice to really be heard, because again, like part of our job to work in the animal field is to give animals a voice, and it's only right to give people who work with the animals a voice. So, and also a place at the table to like really be able to share things. I mean, that's what I say about people. There's some people who are animal people, but definitely we should all be people. I've talked to Debbie about like human education and how we need to like bring that back to sheltering, and how to really teach each other in-house, empathy and compassion for each other. Because outhouse, we do, great work with the community, but a lot of times shelters also forget about staff and, all the hard work. Or we kind of be like, oh, they don't do as much hard work as I do, and I do hard work. So I think it's really important just to constantly recognize people and show that you appreciate them and actually give them a voice.
Yes, Jack. And something that you had mentioned to me, right, is often when we talk about elevating BIPOC individuals, we're going right into the community to think about it, but there are often so many BIPOC individuals in organizations that are being overlooked. Did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so I did talk about that in other like leadership meetings as well, is that people are always like, oh, we need to find this person. We're going to search, all these different states for the best candidate. But it's important to look in-house and train people that are already here and mentor them. And I remember when I had Cindy, who was actually 16 when she volunteered with us at the at WHS, and then she stayed on, and then she's like in her 20s working with us. She did, the wildlife part. She was working with animal control, and then she stayed on, but now she comes back as vet tech relief, but she started when she was like 16 and she's in her late 20s. And I didn't know too much about her, except for she like loved animals. She wanted to work in this field. And I, tried to mentor her, to help her, and to put her in other people's vision so that they can see that, that she had great skills. And so I think that also people need to look at people that are not like them to mentor them, because I know in this field, people mentor people who look like them, who may act like them, but there are other people who have skills and all of these other talents that we're just not tapping into.
The purpose of diversity, right? Don't just look for people that look like you. And some tactic that you can take into that we have done at Humane Rescue Alliance is one thing is cover letters, right? Is there truly a requirement for having a cover letter? What value does that add in someone's employability or even educational background, right? We have removed anything that is not a licensed physician. We've removed educational backgrounds. That way we can increase the value of lived experience and professional experience along with educational experience, as well as pre-existing project, right? Like having someone do a project to be able to show that they're worthy of being able to have an interview or be a final candidate. Think of lack of resources, folks, right? Meet people where they are, as Shaq says. Look for people that don't look like you to create true diversity. And Shaq, in closing, we talked about the past, we talked about the current. I really want to hear about you in the future, right? If this is really the future of animal welfare, in your wildest dream, what does 5, 10, 15 years look like from now?
Well, I would love to see, again, more people program partnerships, because again, that truly does make the family a holistic family. I would love, as I always say, love to see people really, really care for people, because at the end of the day, the person will be either calling about the animal that needs to be rescued, or it's the owner changing their mind and really saying, this is what I need to do for my pet. So I would really like to see people really, this be also a people focused organization, or like within the field itself, because again, this is definitely a people's job.
People and pets together, my friend. And you have taught me so much about that in my career. And I'm very comfortable and confident saying this personal experience has been one of the highlights of my career. I was actually nervous for this because I did not want to let you down the same way that you never want to let our entire community down. And so, folks, we are going to wrap this call up. Just please remember that we are going to continue this conversation on the Maddie's Pet Forum. Shaq and I will both be there. If you have additional questions, we'd be happy to spend additional time with you. And to all of you, we want to thank you for being here, creating the space and the time to listen to not only this beautiful story, but many other candid conversations that you might have attended. We are so grateful for you. Continue to create space. Let's continue to elevate leaders like Shaq. And we hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful day. And Shaq, as my big sister and elder, please close us out.
So I just want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you just think about some of the things I said about, being people focused and really just pushing forward.
I love it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.